What's up, y'all? You're listening to the Aggie Nation Podcast. I'm Alex Miller from the Eagle. Over here, that's Travis Brown from the Eagle. We're inside Kyle Field. If you've ever watched an A&M press conference, we're sitting actually at the podium where, say, Jimbo Fisher, players sit and speak. So,
I should make you go sit out there and ask me questions from out there.
Yeah, honestly. So
just get that power trip.
Anyway, it's Wednesday afternoon for those listening. That's when we're recording this. A&M plays its spring game on Saturday. This afternoon, we got to hear from A&M head coach Jimbo Fisher, a couple players, Max Wright and Damani Richardson. Just kind of, looking back at spring practice, looking ahead at the spring game. And so, yeah, Travis, A&M spring ball's wrapping up this week. And what's interesting is, the transfer portal opens this weekend, the second kind of window per se of kind of that cycle. And one of the key points today was just talking about, where A&M's at scholarship numbers and talking about a few guys that, have transferred in, transferred out.
Yeah, well, the big news today is Matthew Wyckoff, of course, is announcing that he's going to enter the transfer portal. He started a lot of games last year, filled in for Bryce Foster at center when he was hurt, mixed around a little bit in there as well, and was a key part of that offensive line and was seemingly going to be a guy who would slot probably right into potentially a starting role this season. He announced that he's going to enter the transfer portal come this Saturday and will find a new home. Jimbo Fisher said he's really liked how some of the depth has built up with some of those players mentioned. Naboo, as a guy who has kind of filled in, maybe could slot in right behind Bryce Foster as that secondary center. But because of how many players left over the offseason, they're not anywhere close to that 85 scholarship mark. I believe they said it's somewhere between 74 and 75 right now, somewhere in that range of 74, 76 scholarships. But 85, of course, is the limit that the NCAA allots. And so he said that they're going to be active in the transfer portal come Saturday when it opens up. He doesn't know where that will land, but he said in all of his time at Florida State, 81 was actually the highest they ever got. So they don't necessarily always work right up to that 85 scholarship limit. So it'll be interesting to see when that opens up how active, because that hasn't been a staple of Jimbo Fisher's roster building since he's been there and the transfer portal has become a part of this. He's leaned heavily into high school recruiting and just picked up one or two transfer portal players here or there. That's going to have to be a major part of the makeup of this roster this year because of how many players they lost.
Yeah, I think looking at it, A&M's got down to 65 scholarship players. They're going to add 9 freshmen coming in the summer. And so I thought it was interesting, too, because he said at Florida State, his high was 80. They typically hover between 78 and 80. But he said here at A&M, is going into his 6th season now, they've been between 81 and 82. And, when he was at Florida State, that was before, transfer portal, one-time transfer rule, even NIL, maybe playing a factor into things here and there. So, the college game is rapidly changing, as we all know. It was funny, Brent Zorneman asked Max Wright about that today, how he's seen the college game kind of evolve in this going into his 6th year at A&M, and how, roster management is such a, pivotal part in kind of, trying to stay ahead of things and making sure that, when there is attrition, that teams have that depth that they need.
You're starting to see programs around the country kind of hire a general manager type position that's kind of overseeing some of these roster moves positions like a pro sports team would. So it's interesting how the I know people joke that the transfer portal is college free agency, but I mean, that's kind of what it is. And teams and programs are reacting to that accordingly.
Well, before we move into some spring ball recap, one more personnel note. It seems like Tyron Smith, who had transferred in from UTEP, it sounds like he's going back to El Paso.
Yeah, it's something that we've kind of been aware of for a while. Our good buddy over there, Colin Deaver, news reporter, used to be here at KAGS, reports news out there in El Paso. It's something he had been a little bit alerted to that maybe he wanted to go back to El Paso. UTEP and Jimbo Fisher said that's what he believes is going to happen in that situation. He committed here before Ainias Smith announced that he was coming back, and they do hold a similar position, that kind of slot role. I mean, Ainias is probably a little bit more versatile in where he can play on the line or on the wide receiver position. So, you got to understand what different factors played into it, but that definitely could have been one of them. He's not going to be on the Aggie roster this year.
Spring ball is a time for, it seems, coaches and players to, express optimism, and they're encouraged by so-and-so. That's just kind of the general theme, it seems. Some guys that, Jimbo Fisher and a couple of the other players mentioned, we talk about offensive line. Mark Naboo's name came up. And so looking though at the offensive line, Chase Basantis, guy that was an early enrollee after signing in December, his name came up not only from Max Wright, but also Jimbo Fisher. And then whereas on the defensive side, A&M lost Antonio Johnson, Bryce Anderson's name came up a couple times from Damani Richardson and Jimbo Fisher, as well as at linebacker, kind of a position that, A&M's still trying to figure out, some depth, and they're going to have, a couple of veterans with Edgerrin Cooper and Chris Russell. But other than that, it's a pretty young position. He mentioned how Damian Sanford and Torian York, two early enrollees, making some plays and some scrimmages. A&M's going to have those guys play well this season to have any form of depth at linebacker.
Yeah, I know he kind of slotted in that position a few times last year when Antonio Johnson was hurt, but it'll be interesting to see if Bryce Anderson kind of step into that nickel role and be a little bit of that hybrid linebacker safety, a guy who can get in the box and make plays, but also work in coverage. And I think it sounds like the initial reports are that could be a spot where he lands with that. We have to take a quick side note here and talk a little bit about the spring game and how different it's going to be. If you're here at Kyle Field, we just went out there and looked, the crane is gone. They had a crane in the south end zone of Kyle Field. It wasn't a band forming in the south end zone. It was a crane forming in the south end zone. And that they're adding on those suites, that extra level in Kyle Field on the south side of the stadium. But because of that, the crane's gone, but the grass is still kind of growing back in that area, and it's still fenced off. So they will be playing a half-court game. Jimbo, he didn't get into too much detail, but he did go into a little detail on kind of how that'll look.
Yeah, in the past, A&M, they've kind of drafted teams, the captains, the older players, they kind of draft their teams. Jimbo said they're probably going to stay away from that this year, and it's going to be more so the first team offense and the second team defense going against the first team defense and the second team offense. So, ones on ones, twos on twos, and then, as they get into the second half, I'm sure some walk-ons will get to play. That's typically how that goes. It's going to look different. Just from looking out there, it doesn't look like the fence is like right at the 50-yard line. It looks like maybe about the 30, 35.
Maybe even closer than that.
Maybe even closer than that.
Yeah.
So they're probably going to have about 60, 65 yards to play with, not including the end zone. And so, I think special teams is you're probably not going to see a lot of kickoffs. Might see a punt or two. But I think for the most part, the actual play on the field, you can still do that with 60 yards.
My question is, do you have to bring it back outside the 3-point line to change possessions? Do tip-ins count? Is there make it, take it?
Yeah, you have to come back out of the red zone.
Oh, okay.
They should just do the XFL rules.
Sure.
I watched the XFL this weekend. It's actually really fun.
Yeah?
I think it's really fun.
It's interesting. That is for sure. He did mention, too, though, that Donovan Green, on top of the guys that we have already mentioned that have been out for spring, Donovan Green tweaked his ankle, rolled over his ankle in practice this week, and so he might not be available for the spring game. Tight end Donovan Green, who had a lot of production last year.
Something I'm curious to watch about,
Curious to watch for, I should say. Okay. How do the quarterbacks kind of rotate? I'm expecting Connor Wegman to run with the first team and Max Johnson with the second, but does Max Johnson maybe get a drive with the first team at some point? You would think that's probably the case, but I'm curious to see how they utilize that.
And something that we'll get to in a second is I'm kind of curious to see what kind of wrinkles that might be noticeable now that Bob Petrino is A&M's offense coordinator. Seems as if there might be a little more motion in play with this offense.
Yeah, that is a good point. And I would actually be surprised if they didn't flip-flop that way a little bit, because even in past games where they're drafted and stuff like that, they've given guys run with different teams just to give them different looks. Not only, I mean, I think everyone does expect Connor Wigman to be the guy, but Jimbo Fisher, as all coaches usually do, said it's an open competition for everyone. So there's that whole caveat aside. But if Connor Wigman is the guy, as we've seen with A&M quarterbacks the last 2 seasons, guys can get hurt. And next, all of a sudden, the number 2 guy is the number 1 guy. And the more continuity you can get and kind of game time reps you can get with those guys and the first team line, the first team wide receivers, things like that, it never hurts. I would be pretty surprised if we didn't see both of them running on both teams like that throughout the game going on this weekend. The other thing too, I threw out there because I know it's something it's been talked about for several years now, but it kind of reared its head again when Hugh Freeze was asked about this a couple weeks ago in one of their spring practice, Auburn spring practice media availabilities. And that is the idea or the thought that a team could scrimmage an FBS team or another team, a regional team for a spring game instead of doing the inter squad type thing. And I think from a fan's perspective, from even a media coverage perspective, that's enticing because let's face it, other than getting to see maybe what your quarterback looks like, spring games are boring. And so I think the chance to maybe just scrimmage a Sam Houston State, a Texas State, or a regional school around here would be enticing, especially when you look at the 12-team playoff and how that might, because there's going to be a little bit more margin for error with teams, especially in the SEC, to get into that 12-team playoff, you might see fewer schools going the route of scheduling more of these FCS lower regional kind of schools. And then not to mention, you look at in 2 years, the SEC scheduling format, if they go to the, was it 3-6, the 9 game, that's going to eliminate the end of season bye week game,
the cupcake
in
November
game, which then, so there's money that's going to fall off the table in these guaranteed contracts, some of those FCS schools, system schools, regional schools, things like that. And it's a way you're probably not going to make this, couple $1 million that you get to go play in that fall game in the fall, but couple $100,000 to come over and do a spring game. And not to mention in a scenario like this where, yeah, I know A&M wants to have the gate and everything like that, but you could go over to Texas State and scrimmage them for the spring game and you have a full field when A&M's is like that. I don't know. What were your Jimbo Fisher said he doesn't really like it. The players both said it was fun. The idea sounded fun.
Max Wright said it. He was sold. You got him sold, Travis.
Damani Richardson said it was fun, but you don't want to get guys injured, which of course is a big part of that. Jimbo Fisher said, and I'm going to push back on this a little bit, but he said that he doesn't really like it because with a spring game that's inter squad, you can control the scenarios and kind of tip the scales different ways to put players in different situations and stuff like that. And I get that. And it is a little bit easier when it's just all your own players, but NFL teams hold joint practices together during
high schools do it.
Right. Where you still, you might have to plan a little bit more ahead to have the situations and the scripting that you want to do way early in advance, but it can be done. They do it at the NFL level. They do it at the high school level. There's no reason they couldn't do it at the college level.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea.
I think it'd be fun. I mean, even if say A&M was like, okay, we're going to play some of our system schools. We're going to play Prairie View.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. People would come to watch Marching Storm. I know I would.
Yeah, I would too.
Tarleton, their football program's on the rise. You can play Sam Houston. They're moving up to the FBS level. Mm-hmm. They're kind of in that transition period. I think they're going to Conference USA. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could even play like an SFA.
I mean, if you wanted to keep that system money, I know it's a way drop down, but you could go Commerce. Commerce had a great team a couple years ago.
And I think Commerce is moving up to the FCS level. I mean, so, there's games to be had. There's attractions to be had by hosting those games, whether it's just simply playing a different team or having something like Marching Storm kind of, be a little bit of the show. Although then you could maybe have your alumni halftime game, or you just make halftime an hour long and it's more of a spectacle than anything else. But at the same time, Jimbo talks about the controlled scenarios. Okay, in Texas high school football, every team plays at least one scrimmage. A lot of schools play 2 scrimmages in the preseason against another school. When you have those scrimmages, typically you have each team gets 3 drives. It's like 8, 10, 12 plays, and then you're done. And then they play a live quarter, right? I mean, so it's 6 drives and then a live quarter. You can do that, and that allows you to mix and match, say, Connor Wegman, Max Johnson at quarterback. Maybe you want to mix some of the wide receivers or the defensive linemen. I mean, A&M's got a lot of different guys on that defensive line that might be able to contend for some spots, or even on the offensive line where, you have 3 guys who started last year that missed spring ball when you talk about Bryce Foster, Trey Zune, and, well, I guess Matthew Wyckoff's transferring out. He was out for spring practice. You get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so I think that it can be the controlled environment that, a coach would want. And also, too, if you're Prairie View or Sam Houston or Texas State, why wouldn't you want to do it? It's a great opportunity.
I think that what Jimbo Fisher, the mindset he had into it, looked more like he mentioned the Hall of Fame game where in the NFL, it's like the first preseason game of the year and no starters play in that. It's almost like a low-level spring training game in baseball where you're just trying to see who's going to make the roster and everything like that. I don't really see it in the same vein as like a NFL preseason game. I see it more in the same vein as like a joint practice or like the high school scrimmage, because you can still have another team in there and put a bib on your quarterback and it's 2-hand touch on the quarterback.
Exactly.
You can still tell teams, like in certain situations, let's keep guys off the ground. I don't see how the second string guy, defensive lineman going against the first string offensive lineman is going to be any less physical than Sam Houston going against A&M, because that second string guy wants to earn a first string team spot. He's not going to let up, but you can dictate rules. You can tell players, just like in high school, just like in those joint practices at the NFL, keep guys off the ground. No one's trying to get hurt out there. Go hard. Don't touch the quarterbacks, but run your routes. And you know what? Whether you control the scrimmage or not, with all your same players or not, injuries are still going to happen. We've seen it happen in these games where injuries happen in the spring game, and that can affect it because you're going, they're pads on pads, you're going full contact. So it's going to happen. I just think the advantages of not only for the players, but for the fans, the marketing, everything else that goes along with it, it's just too good. And it's a way to continue to kind of funnel money towards some of these smaller schools and let college football support college football in the same way that it has, when we're probably going to see some of those opportunities go away with the 12-team playoff, with a change in the SEC schedule moving forward. So something interesting.
College basketball has scrimmages.
Yeah.
Or they have the little secret scrimmages. They have the exhibition.
Every other sport
College
does.
Baseball and softball, they play fall games.
Football, women's soccer.
Women's soccer has a spring schedule. So does volleyball. I mean, you go down the list, college football is the only one that doesn't. And even when you look at the levels above and below it, they do it.
I think it would be cool if you actually make this a continuing thing. I know probably the route that they would want to go is to keep it with a system school, but I think if A&M and Sam Houston did this every year, that would be fun. There would be a little bit of something going on there. It's the two teams close, I think that would be a really great fun thing for them to do. And you look, because they were talking about in Alabama, like Alabama and Troy have never played each other. If I believe that's what it was, and or UAB, getting some of those teams mixed in with Alabama and Auburn every year. it would be fun for everyone involved. So I think that is something that will probably at least gather more conversational steam as things move forward. Because here's the other thing: as we've learned about college football in realignment, in in everything, in some of these lawsuits, college football is a business. It's run by money. The decisions are made by money, and there's I would think more money to be made in doing these scrimmages with another team than there is just inter-squad, team against team. And once that can be realized that there is in terms of crunching the numbers, I think that's probably the direction this will go.
Yeah, I mean, think about it too. Like, okay, normally a spring game is either free or like what, $5?
Mm-hmm.
I think this weekend it's free. It's been free for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
There have been games in the past where A&M is charged. But okay, say you want to charge $5. Okay, you're not going to fill up Kyle Field for a spring game against Sam Houston. But maybe you have 5,000 Sam Houston fans that drive down from Huntsville.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden you're doubling your attendance, whereas you may have had 10 or 15,000 for this weekend. Maybe you could get 25 or 30.
And I bet whatever the guarantee, whether it's $100,000 or $200,000, that probably covers whatever Sam Houston was making in concessions and whatnot from their spring game if it was open to the public. So it's going to help them out in that regard. And since it is going to be more like a game, then you open up Aggie Park. You might have a little bit of tailgating. You make it more of a full on game day experience. And other interesting things. I don't know if A&M does this, but other teams I've covered in the past, things that they work on in spring games. They sometimes you might have. I know other teams I've covered have purposely had scripted into the play that a player, but they had it scripted, but they didn't tell the training staff. And they had a player go down with an injury. It might have been a fake injury, but he went down with an injury. And it was practice for the trainers to get out there, work with the player. They sometimes would actually simulate catastrophic injury, whether it be like a heart-related thing or something like that, and actually have a rep for the trainers to go out there and get this player off the field. There's other things that go into football. Again, I don't know if A&M does something like that, but there are other scripted things too that they need a script, but all of this can happen under the framework as long as it's just scripted out and mutually agreed upon by both coaching staffs.
Well, there you go. There's our case for A&M to play Prairie View and Sam Houston.
Because nobody really wants to. You might tell yourself you want to go watch a spring game. No one really wants to go watch.
Everybody wants to leave out of the first quarter.
Yes.
When you notice that it's more than half walk-ons out there, with all due respect to the walk-ons, I have a lot of respect for you. People just want to leave. People just want to leave.
Yeah, it's literally fake football. At least having another team would make it less fake of football.
All right, I think that's all the time we have for this week. Be sure to check theeagle.com for all of our coverage leading up to A&M spring game on Saturday. Plus, Travis will be over at Bluebell Park all weekend covering A&M's baseball series against Missouri. Until next time, we'll see you.